I think COVID taught us that the rule of law, democracy is it's fragile. And it's as fragile as we, the people, as you said, are willing to stand up for it. And we're in this place. I mean, you're from, I mean, you've spent most of your life now in Canada, but you came from a country that has
Holland,
many
yeah.
more years of history than the United States. And so I always say when people get upset, especially my friends who think the world is ending, is that we're young. We're if you think about countries, the United States is a punk teenager, right? So, so we're gonna go through our growing pains, and I think there is a test happening, and I think we'll see a shift.
Hello, I am John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, okay, we know where Canada is in British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And then there is a big city there called Vancouver. Where are you, John, being me, in relation to Vancouver? Well, we are 500 miles north, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. And that's in the center of British Columbia, north, south, east, west. And the city is Prince George, about 80,000 people. We have lots of forest all around us. Within 50 miles, we have 100 lakes. We have lots of friends here, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, foxes, wolves, you name them. We call it paradise. Today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Louis Kim, and Louis is a builder, investor, and a spiritual entrepreneur who was redefining what it means to own and lead in the 21st century. And the other interesting part about Louis is that he's a seasonal entrepreneur, an investor, and a coach who has built scaled and ex- excited multiple businesses worth $50 million plus companies. Louis, very interesting bio. Tell us all about you. Where you originally from, your education, and some of
Sure.
the things that happened to you along the way. And obviously, you referred to that in your bio, and where you are today. And so, where do you go from here?
I appreciate the intro, and John, I've been super excited to do this podcast because you are about my parents' age, and the entrepreneurial spirit from your generation is so amazing to me because so much of it was built without these giant illusions or delusions of grandeur. They started with simple purposes, doing small things that over a long period of time became these giant things, right? I'm the child of Korean immigrants. My parents came to the United States in 1977, 78, which was about a year after the president was assassinated, who was more of a military dictator in Korea. And so they came at a time of great instability with nothing. I mean, genuinely, just like yourself, they came with, when you came from Europe to Canada, it's like my folks, they came with nothing, but they also came with two kids. And over the years, that entrepreneurial spirit helped them build and create business and wealth that's now taking care of them in their retirement. So I say that to say always excited to talk to especially entrepreneurs and business people that are from that generation because purpose, life, mission, those things were so clear, and you got it done. There was no social media, right? There's none of
No,
this back then, right? It was serve the customer, give them a good product and service of value, and repeat over and over, right? Over
correct.
and over and over, and build your business. So I'm honored to hear and communicate.
Great, Louis. And then, so this was right after John Kennedy was killed, and was in 19 was that 1978?
Kennedy, I think his assassination one was like the mid '60s,
Oh yeah.
and so for my folks, it was Hak Jung-hee, which was the Korean president at the time.
Okay.
He was a military dictator, but he is also the one that is credited with the what do they call it, the Korean miracle.
Okay.
He put a lot of the things in place to create what is the Korean economy today. But it was a very unstable, and I share that just to say, you I think you were in your 20s when you went to Canada,
24. Yeah.
and yeah, similar sort of thing. They were actually in their 30s, and so they had established businesses and they came, but it was a similar entrepreneurial path where you come with nothing, you have no understanding of the language or culture, just determination, right? And I think that's
Exactly.
so relevant in the in that in life in general, but especially as an entrepreneur, right? Like you've got to have that
And,
drive moving
and
forward.
as you already indicated, is that
Yeah,
I was born in 1940, so
yeah,
I will be in the next couple of months. I will be 85 years young, in my opinion. That's important,
yeah, for sure.
and we'll talk about that as to how and why and all these
Yeah,
other kind of things. And
yeah,
so it was during the Second World War, and I
yeah,
still remember far too many things that we should not have seen. Was affected
yeah,
by PTSD and the effect of after the war that a lot of people, respectfully, may have the illusion that if there is war and the war is over, everything goes back to normal. It simply
yeah,
doesn't. It may
yeah,
take a generation, it may take more than one
yeah,
generation to create stability and all those kinds of things. We were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me that I knew as a 5-year-old that from that point forward, as I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I tried to go when I was 17, then was drafted in, my parents said too young, and I was drafted then when I was 18 in the Dutch Air Force, which was mandatory, not now, for 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years, and then worked in lumber manufacturing. And my dad and my grandfather were both, my grandfather was a master carpenter, my dad worked in lumber, and I started working in the lumber very, very young. And that to me was the second part of my dream, not only go to Canada, but to build my own lumber mill in Canada. And I wanted to start with nothing. And so I
yeah,
couldn't speak the language, didn't have anything, couldn't speak the language, didn't have any family, or didn't have any contacts. Other than I knew in the West Coast, British Columbia, that's where all the timber is. And so I wanted to go to where the timber is, and then we'll see what happens. And so I landed in July of 1965 in Montreal Airport. Then it's now called differently, but then flew one by train all the way across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. Can you believe? My God, that is a long way. So when I arrived in Vancouver, I went to the immigration office and didn't speak English, but fortunately there was a German fellow and I could speak some German. So I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where all the timber is. That's where all the companies are building factories. That's where the opportunities are. So that's what I did. I went by Greyhound bus, 13 hours, to the center of British Columbia, Prince George. And when I came off the bus here 60 years ago, I can still see in the area there, where the bus station used, the Greyhound station was. I came off the bus. I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. And I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But what I did have lots of attitude, I've always been an optimist and I avoid negative. Don't even come close to me. And every day to me is a good day, even now still, has always been passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And then the other part, work ethic, I work harder than anybody. Even now, at nearly 85, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed and I always think I'm late. And then I enjoy every day. I look around me and I say, it's paradise. So because I've seen, as your parents did, the opposite. I grew
Yeah.
up during the Second World War. I've seen what can happen when
Yeah.
dictators take over, and a lot of people get hurt, and it destroys countries. And so things were tough. But that period where I saw too much, still have the feeling of hunger, and all the other things, saw far too much that we should not have seen, that laid a foundation that has helped me appreciating Canada, and in particular British Columbia, in opportunity. And then the other part was, as you already indicated with your parents, I came here with a purpose. That I wanted to be a Canadian, and I knew once I landed here, this is where I belong, and I still do today. And then at the same time, I've been entrepreneurial, look at opportunities, and then gradually started building up companies, and still doing the same today. And then the other part, and you will be talking about that as well, the other part is fitness and health, and that means mental, physically, and all those things that are so important. And it took me, as it likely did you, at one point in my life in 2008, when I was already 68 years old, I had a case of diverticulitis that is a rupture of, in my case, or affecting. I'm not a doc, but if somebody says I have pain on my right side, it could be the appendix. I'm not a not a medical observation. It's simply that I know of. If it is on the left side, it could well be. I had never heard of diverticulitis, but now I know that could well be your colon, and in some cases, it ruptures. In my case, it did, and it spreads all the toxins through your body, and it needs attention quickly, within 48 hours. Otherwise, things get even worse, and then death will maybe follow. And so I got an operation. They took 20 centimeters out of my colon, and it gave me my wife, that we've been together for about 42 years, is a vegetarian, and I didn't quite listen as well. I did okay, but not as good as I could. And I was the same as a lot of other people. At the end of the year, I say, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And at the end, I say, I'm going to buy a membership at a gym, and then I'm going to go to the gym. And then 2 weeks later, I can find 100 reasons why I'm too busy to go to the gym. And then the same follows. So in my case, I knew the doc, after my operation, came to my room, and he said, John, you came this close. And I said, that for me was the lesson. So in 2009, I started changing my direction in terms of diet, listening more to my wife in terms of being a vegetarian. The amazing thing now is I do all the shopping for us. And if I go to a grocery store to shop, I stay on the outside because I'm not interested in the center aisles where the processed and super processed foods are, because we don't know what is in it. So we want to make sure they are organic. And then the other thing that I did, Louis, is that I hired a trainer from 2009 forward, 16 years ago, and started training on a regular basis, strength training, and to a certain extent cardio, but mainly working on strength. And so after about 6 years, somebody said to me, is in working with my trainer, hey John, have you ever thought about competing? I said, me? Yeah. I said, well, why not? Gives me a goal, right? So I did that, and then started competing bodybuilding and physique. Came in second in bodybuilding, third in physique in Northern British Columbia, qualified me for the provincial, did the same, qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. And then COVID came, and now again at 85, I wrote a book about that, Living Young, Dying Old. Is that picture of me, actually. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And I'm again getting ready for competing in the Arnolds in 1926. And so, but first and foremost, what became important to me is physical health, diet, and mental, physical, your whole body, because your body wants to be fit and healthy. And we cut out all the things that are not good for us. And I like it and I enjoy it. And then the same with going to the gym. I
Yep.
like going to the gym. If I go to the gym, which I do all the time, it's I train hard and I enjoy it. So my
You
yeah, go ahead, John.
your health journey and what you shared about your immigrant story, there's the two things to that are so important. The first one, you said it, the work ethic, right? Work ethic is the great equalizer of everything, right? If you think about great tennis players, in the 80s, John McEnroe was a phenomenal tennis player, but the man never practiced, never, right? And had he put in the effort like Becker or Borg, what would he have done? Right? Who could he have been as a tennis player? He just had raw talent, and the guy spent more time partying than actually there. And I think in his older age now, he kind of regrets what was there. But talent gets you so far, but it's work ethic. And even in the gym, what you're saying, the work ethic, right? The work you're putting forward. But the two things that you also had in this fitness journey, and along with the immigrant story, is clarity. I am at a point where I truly believe clarity of our purpose, of our goals, our intention, the why behind where we're going is so important because it really does just filter all the noise away, right?
Yeah.
I've in my own journey of entrepreneurial health and even the emotional and mental health things that I've been through the years. I've gotten to a point where I appreciate the fact that I truly believe every single person on the face of this planet has a unique greatness that exists within inside them. And I believe it's imparted to them. You can call it God, the universe, the infinite intelligence, whatever you believe, it's imparted with you. And it doesn't mean that you have to be this great entrepreneur with 400 employees, 10 companies, right? Like that was unique to John's story, right? And it doesn't mean you have to go do this or that. It could be you want to be the greatest mother or the greatest, like your thing is the teacher, a planter, gardener, whatever it is, but we have it. And I think the clarity when we can find it and we can silence the noise, we start to hear the voice that's within us that's there, and that voice drives us. And that voice is, like you said, like the when you hear the negative, it doesn't stay. It's in one and out the other because you're so clear about your direction and where you're going. And I think there's so much unhappiness in our world. And I mean, I don't know what it's like as some, I'm Gen X, I'm very Gen X, but as someone who comes from your generation, I'm always curious as to how you view the current state of people in the world and happiness, because this is an important factor of where we are about anything, right? If whether you want to grow a business or you want to do into anything, understanding what's happening on a macro level. Because for me, I see there was a world that I was brought up in with certain ideals and certain values of where we're headed, and then to see these things, especially in the United States, being sort of challenged, right? And but I also think this challenge is also creating this other sort of schism where there are people who are awakening to, hey, maybe this old way of doing things isn't working anymore. But I'm curious, John, from your perspective, having lived the life that you have, how do you see us where we are in this point in history? Because it is another era of potential challenge ahead of us, and to have been through what you've been through, where do we as individuals help every other people find that clarity, right? Like how do we help them get there so that they can be happier, or are we just swimming in this thing, this moment in history that is just there?
I like the question, Luis. Is that the foundation that I had is growing up during the Second World War, seeing far too much that we should not have seen. My mom and dad were married in 1938. They were in love. My dad had a job. They rented a house. So they were happy and fairly quickly
It
had two
was
kids.
simple. It was simple.
Yeah, and they enjoyed it. But then, all of a sudden, what happened is a dictator called Adolf Hitler decided that he should take Poland because part of that was German, and somehow he justified it and got everybody in Germany behind him. He invaded Poland, followed by wanting to take over Western Europe. And my dad then, in April of 1940, was called into the Dutch army. And then the last time that they heard from him and saw him was just before the bombing of Rotterdam, where the German dictator Adolf Hitler didn't feel that things went fast enough in terms of Holland surrendering to them, and he sent them a message bombing the center of Rotterdam, a huge city, and killing thousands of people. That's the last year. For 5 years, they would not know if he lived or died. For my mom, that was then pregnant with me in April, May of 1940, and the two kids, they went through a difficult time, and so did everybody around them. And so, we grew up, and the first thing that I remember is when I was about 3.5 years old, is hearing bombers overhead bombing, this was the Allied forces, the infrastructure of the German war machine, and in the northwestern part of Germany that touches the North Sea, Wilhelmshaven, Hamburg, Kiel, and all those places, and that came right over where we were in. Again, visualize Holland, go to the northeastern part of Holland, and right within 10-15 minutes of the German border. So my mom would take us outside in the evening to watch overhead, and I can still hear the sound of hundreds of bombers. And in the distance, the reason that she did is she felt safer outside than inside. It was not looking at the pretty planes, but the sound was unbelievable. And in the distance, we could see the sky being red of cities burning. And so those were the initial impressions. And then the 1944 in particular was difficult. It was the hunger year where the Germans had cut off all food supply to us. And I remember as kids, my brother, my sister, myself, we would go with gunny sacks every morning into the railroad yards, pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason we did as kids, because they wouldn't shoot us, they'd boot us one, but we'd be back the following morning. And I can still, even now, 80 years later, I can feel the feeling of hunger is still with me. And so, and then obviously towards the end, when the Allied forces, the United States, Canada, and the UK in particular, when they decided to eliminate the German army in Western Europe and beyond and defeat them, and landed in June of 1944 in Normandy and pushed their way in. The Canadians went through France, Belgium, and then the western part of Holland and pushed them out in the north. And I still remember that, seeing far too much as the Germans were trying to make their way back to Germany. We saw far too many things we should not have seen. People being shot, and laying around, and people being dragged out of their houses to not return, not knowing where they would go. And there was an environment of anxiety always. And as kids, you could feel the anxiety and the fear. So I remember that, and I remember then being liberated by the Canadian Army, as I said earlier, on April the 12th, 1945. So, but all of that became the foundation that served me well as I went forward, because what I love is seeing around the world how fortunate we are living in North America in particular, and seeing what is going on in the Ukraine and seeing what is going on in the Middle East, and then seeing dictatorships like Putin, like North Korea, like Venezuela, like Cuba, and I can just go at China, and I can just go on and on and on. And then we here in North America are so immensely fortunate because it is the foundation, especially in the United States, the foundation of democratic rule for the last 200, 250 years.
Yeah.
However, what concerns me that some of the things that are going on now to put that potentially in danger. And I always remember back when Europe was rebuilt and the Allied forces in particular, but what followed after that is the Marshall Plan, together again, left by the United States, Canada, and some of the other, injecting capital to rebuild Europe. And I then still look today at the United States in particular as the example of democratic rule. And what is there, the foundation is their constitution, because it starts with we, the people. And
Yeah.
I hope it remains that way. But all of those things have served me well from what I've seen.
Yeah.
With all due respect, I'm not sure a lot of people that did not have that benefit that I had of appreciating democratic rule and all the other things that are so fortunate to us in opportunity, that how precious it is, but even more importantly, how delicate it is.
I'm so glad you said that, because it is. I think COVID taught us that the rule of law, democracy, is very. It's fragile, and it's as fragile as we, the people, as you said, are willing to stand up for it. And we're in this place. I mean, you're from. I mean, you've spent most of your life now in Canada, but you came from a country that has
Holland,
many
yeah.
more years of history than the United States. And so I always say, when people get upset, especially my friends who think the world is ending, is that we're young. We're if you think about countries, the United States is a punk teenager, right? So so we're going to go through our growing pains, and I think there is a test happening, and I think we'll see a shift. I also think there's a change happening, not just generationally, but how we live. Because really, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism as a vehicle and as a tool. But for me, I don't think capitalism is meant to solve all problems,
No.
right? And so that is the role of government, to say these are what we want as a society. And unfortunately, the narrative here has been so bifurcated that they can't exist together, that this is bad for this, as opposed to, no, they're supposed to work together. And entrepreneurs like us go out there, we create wealth, we build value, and we do this. However, where that goes and how it's used is the role of government. And for as much turmoil there is, I'm very hopeful for the future. I do think we will have a period of time that will be tough, but that's tough on our definition. As you said, I mean, resilience comes from adversity, right? You have to go through hard times to be resilient. And that builds, I think it was Hemingway that said, I'm totally butchering this, but it's like, you get strong at the cracks, right? The broken pieces, that's where the person gets stronger. And I think as societies and people, it's there too. And I'm sure even on your entrepreneurial path, you've experienced this, that when you came into it and you started in your 20s with no money, um, you made a lot of mistakes, but you didn't let those mistakes keep you down. You kept moving and you kept rolling. You kept moving forward. And I think we as people, as a society, have to look at these things that way. And we have to say, look, things are happening. Yes. Are there things you don't agree with? Yes. Then go do something about it, right? Go out, whether it's protest, run for office, call your senator, congressman, whatever it is, take action, right?
Be proactive.
And be proactive, absolutely. And but it's also, it's like you're saying, it rooted in there, right? Was it the attitude, and the work ethic, right? It's like those things matter. It's like you've got to get out there and continue to push forward. I think one of the big values of entrepreneurial, and I'm fortunate. I like you. I started my first job for my parents. I was 8 years old. And so my parents owned a liquor store on the border of Washington, D.C. at a time that the crack epidemic was happening here in the United States. So it was not the safest place to be. And in elementary school, the only way I could spend time with them in the summer was to actually go to their businesses. And so I'd spend all summer with them. And there was one day, my mom was by herself. My dad, I don't remember, he wasn't there. He was doing something. And back then, too, the lottery machine, which now there's a lottery machine at every 7-Eleven around the corner. But at that point, in the state of Maryland, there was only one per sort of region of the county because they were afraid of the gambling, right? But they did it because they wanted the tax base. So they had it in these regions. So the one machine that we had was like the one machine for like 30, 40 miles. And so it would get really busy in the evenings after these people would come off work and go there. And it was so busy. My mom's by herself. The line for selling alcohol is getting there. This is long. She's short staffed. So I asked her if I could help. And so she sat me down in front of a lottery machine and I started punching keys when I was 8 years old. And then for like the next 4 years, every summer I'd be spending there. I'm pretty sure these days, if it happened, social services would come take me from her. But it taught me so much at a young age. And even with, and I got to learn so much from watching her because we apply this in our investments and the businesses we go into. Selling alcohol, lottery tickets, and whether it was selling like a bag of chips, whatever it was, my mother would always treat the customer with absolute respect. And the customers came to love her to the point where if bad things happened, they would stand up for her, right? And
Yeah.
she is a total outsider in this community. And to the point where 9 years of ownership of this one liquor store, everything else around in that neighborhood had been at least held up, I don't know, 2, 3 times in 9 years. Didn't happen once, right? And it's because of how she treated the customer. And she took a business, by the way, where, she bought it and then the broker who sold it to her lied about the numbers. My mom didn't understand about like, the financials. It was gut feeling. Like it's that entrepreneurial thing. She saw this, I see a vision, I sign off, she gets into it and it's doing like half the revenue.
Yeah.
Right. So the first 3.5, 4 years was just building that back up. And it was through that. It was every interaction, every customer, make them happy, make them feel good.
Yeah.
And over time, they built it to a point and they sold it and they moved on to the next thing. But it was there were so many lessons that I learned at that young age watching that. And the biggest thing is this orientation towards customer and taking care of the customer. And I feel like with the tech industry in particular, they work so hard not to interact with the customer base and they forget that like without us, the consumer who buys their product or service, they don't exist, right? They don't have a business, they don't have a life, and they forget that, right? And it's unfortunate. And the key being that if you can orient, I'm sure you've done this with your own businesses. I'm sure that's how you differentiated in the beginning was this relationship and this communication because you can't start from nothing, be nobody, and build and take market share or find new customers without taking care of people better, right? And
Exactly.
and I'm sure that was the case for you when you started.
Yeah.
Was just it was one by one. They're like, I like John. I want John to succeed. So I'm going to do business with him.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And then the other part that was a challenge for me is that it took me a long time to determine who am I,
Yeah.
because I had challenges along the way. Obviously, the war years were challenging, and then academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3, and then I failed grade 7 3 times. And they said, "What are we going to do with this guy?" And my parents were beautiful people. Some people suggested send him to the mentally challenged school. He said, "No, we're not gonna, we're not gonna do that." So maybe send him, make him a furniture maker. So my dad had a friend that had a furniture factory. So they sent me there at 12 and a half years old. I became a furniture maker. And I loved it. And so, but my dream was always there to prove to my friends that used to be my friends that went to school with me and then went on to college and university that I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down at. But I always knew inside of me. I'm just as smart as everybody else. And I felt that going to Canada as a dream, and then to build my own lumber mill, starting with nothing, I could prove to me that I was just as smart and I can do it. But in order to do that, I had to start with nothing, and I did. And so, so coming here, as I said earlier, the land of opportunity, and nobody ever in Holland, the way it used to be, Louis, is that they would say, no matter what you do, you want to buy a house, you're going to get married, you're going to get a job or apply for a job. It's always, where are your diplomas? I had no diplomas. But nobody ever asked me here in Canada, although I'm a business person and obviously I do all this other stuff. Nobody asked me any questions. It was just, but my foundation became is that who am I was important. And it took me a long time to figure out who am I and why did I have the challenges until I found one day after I was already here for 32 years. In Canada. So it was in 1997. I was already successful, all kinds of business and all kinds of other things. I went into a bookstore and picked up a book. And I have the actual book that I picked up in 1997. So that was close to 30 years ago. Driven to Distraction. And I had no idea. I don't know why I picked it up. And I don't know what it was all about. And as I looked at it, it was a book written by Dr. Edward Hollowell, who has written 18 books, and the book is about ADHD. I didn't even know what it was until I read it, and all of a sudden I said, oh my God, that's me. And so, and as I went through the book, and I wrote in the book, actually here, January 1997, in Dutch, because I was ashamed of it, because it was implied that it had a stigma of mental disorder of some sort or another. Now I know finally who I am in Dutch. And so the more I found out about it and went to Google and starting to check it out, I came to the conclusion it's a superpower.
Yeah.
And so, and now a lot of people say to me, you're an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a podcaster, and I have 10 different companies. It's not about that, but all this. I say, how do you do all of that? I say ADHD, that's how I do it. But the other part that it gave me is that, and that's why this media is so important, like podcasting. There we are sitting here, Louis, the two of us, we've never met before. On interesting interaction about our lives and our life stories. And we know now that probably a couple of million people around the world are watching us.
Yeah.
And podcasting is only on its infancy.
Yeah.
It becomes more popular than newspapers and news programs and all the other things because, as you said earlier before we started it, is saying, what is the objective? I say the objective is, I want to know about you because I saw some of your bio, which in my opinion are very interesting. You have the same feeling. We going for dinner together and we have a conversation and we get all those people around the world saying, I relate to this, I relate to that. And it's a candid conversation that you and me have about the challenges of lives that go on. And we hope, I hope, and I believe you do, that at least some people will say, that gives me encouragement or helps me dealing with challenges that I have, is saying that everything is possible. And the foundation for me has always been attitude, passion, work ethic, but will follow is success. And we live, I do a lot of flying around in commercial flights in the United States as well as in Canada. And a lot of times I sit by the window and I look outside, I said, it's paradise. It's
Yeah.
paradise, you know.
It's so interesting. There's so much that you just shared. The when we look back in our lives, the dots we can connect, right? It's the person who spoke German who directed you to where to go. What if that person didn't know and sent you somewhere where it's just farmland, right? Like
Exactly.
going into the bookstore, you see a title for a book, something draws you to it, right?
Yeah,
And it brings you there. And when you, as you were saying that, I was thinking that what I was feeling is we're being guided, right? You're being guided to say, hey,
yeah,
pick this up, read this because it's for you, right?
yeah. And
And
the person that wrote it, Dr. Halliwell, is a
yeah,
professor, medical doctor, well known in around the world, has written 18 books. He is ADHD and has dyslexia. So do I.
wow, wow,
And so and I touch on it in some of my presentations, other ones I don't, but it's important for me to share with my challenges that I had along the way and saying that stay positive, everything is possible. And so that if I can do it, anybody can do it along the way. But the key is the foundation and all the challenges that we had, you had, with your parents' background during a very very difficult period in
yeah,
Korea, and then coming to North America or the United States in particular with two
yeah,
kids and not having anything and not having money and then starting from the ground up and then
yeah.
becoming successful, which then lay down the foundation for what happened to you as you went forward.
100%. Yeah. Um, the one other thing I want to touch on what you shared before is the ADHD, because that's also when you said your superpowers, absolutely, because that also is where your curiosity comes from, right? And I'm
Yeah,
sure that curiosity has led you to so many places. It's led you to this conversation. And it's the little things that you learn over time that you say, oh, this is useful here. It's so funny because people think innovation means, coming up with chat GPT, right? Like that's the innovation. Sometimes innovation is just as simple as understanding conceptually this thing here I can apply here and do amazing things with it, right? It's the Henry Ford, right? The conveyor model for meat packing to cars. And I think you don't have that if you can't create that sort of innovation if you don't have curiosity. You have to constantly be
exactly.
curious. And honestly, for me, I have the same sort of thing. I was the kid that always asked why, annoyingly,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. That's a good one though.
it's yeah, yeah, but I've had so many amazing experiences from it, right? Just allowing the question of why, what's this, what's that, and asking questions. I mean, I don't think I've ever been in an Uber without talking to the driver and asking about their life, right? Because there's
Yeah,
always bits and pieces that you just learn about life as a whole,
I do
you
the
know?
same. Yeah,
Yeah, I figured
yes,
you would.
yeah. So the interesting part about it is that so my education became not the formal educational path that
Yeah,
people take, but it was a part of it. But the hard times that we watched and the difficulty was part of it, and then but followed my grade 7 failing, if you wish, or succeeding. Then from there on in, I had the hunger for knowledge.
yeah,
And I wanted to know what made people successful. And so that some people ask me, saying that when I came to Canada, I had my suitcase, I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then very little money. They asked me, what were the books that you took with you? Well, amazingly, even then already, I took a book with me as Management by Drucker in Dutch.
wow, wow,
Already then. And I was
yeah,
already thinking about, and when I initially was a cleanup man, and the other
yeah,
book that I took with me is Logical Thinking in Dutch.
yeah,
And the other book was about Canada. But already when I was piling lumber on the green chain, first cleanup man, then piling lumber on the green chain, and walking towards 8 kilometers, going and coming back the same. Took me 3 hours a day to get to work initially, but that's what I did. But then when I came home, I already was working on my company, my lumber company that I wanted to build, designing the layout of the mill, the heading on my stationary Brink Forest Products Ltd. And all of that. I already was there mentally.
Well, I was going to ask you this. As you're coming over, you've got these books. I mean, listen, in their 20s, immigrating over, who's reading Drucker, right? Like it's not a usual thing. You know, here I am thinking you're going to be reading some Napoleon Hill manifestation things. No, it's like practical. But and I'm asking this because you said that. How certain were you, right? Because the hunger was so strong when you came. What you set out to do, you were going to get it done. Like, do you remember how like what how did it feel? Because I feel like it's that there's a lesson in there that's so important because people get lost in this world of, you know, this manifestation, all that. But I think you've got the key, right? It's
The
this.
interesting part about it is, Louis, is that I've been, and that's maybe one of my benefits as ADHD. I'm not sure or not, or some of the things that happened to me in the Second World War or what I saw. But I've always, a couple of things happened to me. I was very good, even in school, I was very good at numbers, and I was a very good writer. Because of dyslexia and ADHD, I was not very much
To
good
work
at
at it.
anything else. You know,
Yeah.
but the other part that I discovered, even still today, and being successful in business, I've always been a visionary as to where will I be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Not me personally, but in terms of the areas that have my interest. May it be lumber manufacturing. I have 4 silos actually. The one is lumber manufacturing, the other one is warehousing, distribution, and logistics, and the other one is real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial, and then the other one, interestingly enough, is media. And so those are the 4 silos, and all of them are growing and expanding, going through all the ups and downs along the way. But you know, that I visualize as to where will they go and how will they get there, and that's what happened. This July is my first company, Brink Forest Products Ltd. The lumber company has been in business for 50 years, and so and some of the other ones, you know, we acquired and built later. But I still look forward to what will it look like as we go forward.
Yeah, it sounds like you came with a clear vision of where you're going, which I'm sure made it so that the road is certain. It wasn't this ambiguous, amorphous thing. It was clear, and this is where I'm going. I think the other thing that you just shared too, in terms of time, people get sold these days on this idea that things happen overnight. And I think when it comes to anything in terms of value creation, in particular, value creation and wealth, the simplest rule is you take something of value and you hold on to it for as long as you can, right? As a
Exactly.
business and an entrepreneur, you follow that curve and you continuously expand your creation of value in the marketplace. But people don't maybe it's the instant gratification culture we live in today that people have these expectations, but the truth is a business doesn't even become functional until the third year, right? The
Exactly.
first 3 years is just chaos, right? And if you make
Yeah.
it to year 5, you're already beating the statistics. You make it to year 10, then you're in a whole different class. You make it to year
Exactly.
20, you're probably pretty loaded at that point, right? Like
Exactly. So what I always say is that a lot of people talk to me about entrepreneurship, and they like to do this, is saying that it can be very exciting. On the other hand, they have no illusions that it
yeah.
is demanding. Some people have the idea that entrepreneurs, what they do once you get into entrepreneurship, you spend most of your time planning holidays and bringing money to the bank. The answer is no. that, as you said, if you get first through the first couple of years, that is it's chaos, and God only knows what else will happen. And so I want through. But the other part, Louis, is very important. Is can be very demanding on families, and
Yeah,
and
100%.
and so you need to have partnerships that are supportive, not to the full extent because it's hard to imagine what will happen, but at least initially when you need that support, and that it will be difficult sometimes on families, is something that has to be accepted.
I'm so thankful for my wife because she's understanding. And so if she comes home from work and maybe she's had a long day, it's 9 o'clock, she walks through the door. If I'm on a phone call, as long as I just acknowledge, say hello, she understands, right? She understands this is where I am. This is the phone call. If I'm out of bed at 4:30 instead of 5 to go do something because it's related, she just gets what I'm doing because she understands how important it is to me. And you're so right because I mean, I mean your marriage I mean the company's 50 years and your marriage you said 42. Like there's a there's a data point there that people have to understand that there's the stability helps create the opportunity for the entrepreneur to excel, right?
Absolutely.
If I know I feel secure, safe, and loved at home, me and you want to go back to like prehistoric man, I can leave the cave and go find my dinner, right? Like we can go out and do it because we know that we can come back. Because and what you were saying is the jump from an employee to ownership. Everyone thinks it's about the money and this. No, it's the responsibility, right? When you wake up, yes, you've got teams, you've got management, but there's over 400 people whose lives rely on you and your
Exactly.
decision making about where things are going, right?
Exactly.
And that's a very big responsibility that people just don't truly understand. And yes, you're right. The entrepreneurial life has a lot of beautiful things that we get from it. There's benefits, the things that we do, but the cost isn't spoken enough because there is a cost, and that cost goes beyond just time. It's what we expend in just, I guess, our own psyche, right? Like the things that we have to deal with. Like if something happens, where you operate, and some politician decides that, well, where you are, these things are now protected, and all of a sudden 40% of your supplies to the mill get cut off. That's not just it's not John can't buy another Lamborghini. It's how does John keep those people employed, and how do we keep this operation going for the long run? Those are the things that I think people don't take into account. They see the sex appeal without understanding the weight. And I feel like if you start with understanding the ownership aspect and the weight, then you're headed in the right path because then the challenges you face, you understand, are just a part of what the process is, as opposed to some difficult life altering issue, right? It's par for the course. I think we get so lost in our own minds about what things mean and things that happen, but when our purpose is there and we're focused on where we're going and we're clear with this vision of where we're going, all of that stuff becomes manageable.
Exactly.
And it is something that allows us to continue to grow.
And then the other part has always been important for me, as I'm sure it is for you, because I heard that already, is that from my beginning in Holland up to when I was young, we always were involved in communities and giving
Mm,
back. And
yeah.
that always has been an important part of me, and even still today, but even from the beginning, when I didn't
Yeah.
have much to give financially, but at least I would be involved in community and give back, because that again, and relationships are very important. Obviously they are, but also community is important, in giving that satisfaction of being part of communities in particular is important. The least important to me is making a lot of money. That is the least
which
important.
is which is which is hilarious if you think about how people will perceive you, right?
Yeah,
You've got large companies and all these employees, and they probably think inherently he's all about the money. And when you say it, I think the only person that will truly understand that is someone else who's another entrepreneur who understands that the money is, if you chase the money becomes, you become this person of extraction, right? You become ways of compromising your integrity, doing things that are not up to a standard that I think most people should live, right? We should be focused on doing good, giving back and purpose. But if you focus on what you're doing, the people, then you always operate from a place of integrity, right? You always operate from a place of this higher standard to achieve, because it is, this act of commerce is something that's very connected to our existence as humans, right? We've traded and we've done this for millennia, and I think what you just said about not focus on the money is just one of those things that people wouldn't even understand. People
No.
don't understand because it's the truth.
Yeah.
I know for a fact it's the truth, right? It is the bonus, right? It helps make everything else happen, but it's not the primary focus.
No. So, Louis, what I found interesting is then before we started this program, you expressed some concerns about what do you expect from
Yeah.
this podcast between you and me that have
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
met before, other than
Yeah.
I have a bio. And I said, what it is in my mind is that
Yeah.
what I do with all my podcasting, I'm interested in you for all the things that not only in your bio but in the discovery, in the conversation. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that between you and me, sharing our conversation with the rest of the world
Yeah.
will be interesting to a lot of people. And that then being the case, it was a successful podcast from my perspective, and very, very interesting. The hour went by far too quick, and
Yeah, it
so we
did.
have to stay in touch,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
so and do likely in other podcasts at some point. I'm going to mention it to Scott to do that, and
Yeah.
then at the same time for people watching us that
Yeah.
like what we are doing, both of you
Yeah.
and me, do you have a contact point at all where people can get a hold of you if they or share, find out what you're
Yes.
doing?
There's so I am the founder of a private equity firm, and it's Yusan Capital. You can just go to the website yusancapital.com. And then on Instagram and TikTok, I have a personal where I hope to share wisdom for people, and that's just parts of Lou. It shows more, the less serious side, the all the pieces of me as an individual. So it's really you can reach out. There's a contact form on our company website, and then through Instagram or TikTok.
And this podcast will be released in the next 4 to 5 hours. I release it very quickly. It will
Great.
not be edited. Virtually, we seldom edit anything, no matter
Sure.
what it is. At one point, we have an earthquake when I was introducing somebody, and
I
I said,
saw
"Oh
the
my!" I
clip
didn't
of
say
that.
it, fortunately, and we even decided to leave that in our podcast because that's what I like about it, to make it
Yeah.
open, genuine, and for all those people watching us and they want to see more of this, hear more of this
Yeah.
from you and me, then subscribe to us, share it with others, comment on it, and like it if you like it, and it encourages us to do more of communicating with the world, and podcasting is only on its infancy. It will go
Yeah.
much higher, much further in the world, and I love it.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for taking the time, and I really appreciate it.
And the feeling is mutual, Louis. Take care.